One of the things that bothers me so much was this assumption that we were all part of the mafia, as they called it. In Buffalo, it was called the Arm, it was called the Outfit. In Chicago, it was called different things in different places. But La Cosa Nostra is the Sicilian mafia. You know, the silliness of all of that, making heroes out of awful criminals and perverts and people who held us back as a people who preyed on the weakest and the most vulnerable. You were at the mercy of people who took advantage of you. That's the kind of thing that happened. And you know, for too many Italian Americans, there was no other way out because there was so many doors slammed in their face. So when I look at, for instance, the Hispanic community, and I see what's happened to them, I relate to that. When I see African Americans and the difficulty that they're having, we were Caucasian, we were white, and still this happened to us. Imagine if you are in a situation where your skin pigment is a little bit darker and that has a way of making the world look at you differently, of holding you down, of not giving you opportunities. How are you supposed to make more of yourself when nobody will give you a chance? To me, that's why I went to law school. That's why I became a lawyer. I wanted the opportunity to do good, not only for myself. Please, I don't want to sound like a saint. I'm anything but that. I'm very selfish, very materialistic, but I try to understand my weaknesses. I try to understand that I have an obligation bigger than myself, bigger than my family. And I think if we stop and think about it, and if we think about what we owe, what we all owe, whatever we do in life, we need to make sure that we make a positive difference. You know, I don't want to sound preachy, but I went to Canisius College, and the biggest lesson I learned was that you had to be one for others. As St. Ignatius said, you had to dedicate your life to more than yourself. And if you did that, you would be a success. But I remember Judge Joe Mattina, who's passed away, telling me that law firms would slam the door in his face, big law firms, when he tried to get a job because he was the wrong ethnic makeup. What kind of thinking is that? And when I think about women and the struggle that they've had, and I recognize that from my own experience, people say, why did you hire so many women? And I did. When I was running a bail program, I hired women who had to get up at 4:30 in the morning and be downtown at the lockup, because they were there and they were prompt and they were dedicated, more so than the guys, is my feeling. And as law students, they were beginning to emerge, and they took very seriously this opportunity and what it meant to other people, that they were going to be examples, because it isn't like today where there are, so many, as many women as men, maybe more, in professional schools and all that. It was different. That's why nobody ever thought that my sister Teresa should go to college. Nobody ever thought of that, including her. And it's crazy. It's what we're doing as a society, and when we do things like that, is cutting ourselves off from 50% of the brain power, maybe more if you listen to my wife and my daughter. They've educated me. They've made me see my important responsibility. When I was U.S. Attorney, I hired women. Why did I hire them? Because they were good. Not because they were women, because they were good. And I wasn't going to let the fact that they weren't men stop me from hiring them. I remember experiences where people would complain about women coming to courtrooms in pants. Yeah, well, guys come in courtrooms every day with pants and you don't get your buns in an uproar. I look back and I'm pretty satisfied with my own advocacy for women and for minorities and for people who had a little tougher time. I do not consider myself in any way to be truly a product of deprivation in my life. I mean, I had problems just like all the rest of humanity has problems. I've had health problems. I'm sitting here today. I'm 81 plus years of age. I still have most of my marbles. I am frustrated by the selfishness of modern day society, which gets more and more focused on the wrong things. How many new clothes do you have to have, except for ties? Never too many ties. If you're not below the poverty line, you should be finding ways to help other people, whether it's working in a soup kitchen, whether it's being a volunteer, whether it's going into a hospital or a nursing home and reading to some ancient person like myself who maybe needs a little companionship. I look back and I say, thank you, Mom and Dad. Thank you for what you did, because that's really where it comes from. It comes from your parents. Yes, Italian Americans have had to fight, but no more so than any other group. What really frosts my socks so very much is that people think they think it's funny to refer to the Buffalo Bills superfans as the Buffalo Mafia. I am so offended by that. And you know, 3/4 of Italians, half Italians anyway, Italian Americans, think there's nothing wrong with it. Oh, it's so funny. It's not funny. These are vicious criminals. These are people who prey on the weakest of our society. These are people whose values include killing and murder and torturing people. My God, we're aggrandizing this. We're making these into heroes. I will say this to you, and I mean this sincerely. No other ethnic group that I know of would put up with that. Nobody would stand by, and I say this and I applaud them, whether they're African Americans or Irish American or Polish Americans, they would not stand for what Italian Americans think is sort of, romantic. The Godfather did more damage to Italian Americans than you can imagine. It did it by making these people into men of honor. They are men of dishonor. One of the great lessons that I learned was that there was a Michael Amico and a Sam Giambrone. Mike Amico was the sheriff of Erie County, and his chief deputy for many years was a guy named Sam Giambrone. And they are intimately involved with this story of hide in plain sight. They were the officers who went and testified on organized crime in Buffalo after years of denial by J. Edgar Hoover about the existence of the mob. There was finally a recognition that it not only existed, but that it was really harmful. The Witness Protection Program had significant value. It really helped to break the back of organized crime, traditional organized crime. I say traditional because today we still have organized crime, believe me, but it's not traditional, it's transactional. One of the things about organized crime in the traditional sense was the familial and community ties of it. That's gone. That's gone. It's all about making money. It's no longer about survival or about having no other options, for the most part. Traditional mob guys today often will be the financial arm for illegitimate and legitimate businesses. Do you ever wonder sometimes how a particular restaurant or business can stay and be in the black? because every time you go in there, there's never anybody there. Every time you go by there, there's nobody. Think about it. And it doesn't have to be in a person whose name ends with a vowel any longer. It can be anybody, because again, it's all transactional. The government now takes great pains to make sure that they vet these people more carefully, so that when somebody is entering the program, there's more attention paid to spouses and children and their relationships and who's going to be left behind, and provisions are made either for the transfer of custody or for some relocation possibilities, telling people before they go in what they're going to face, both the relocated people and the people who are going to be left behind. The children, if they're old enough, are given options and opportunities. The program isn't nearly as important today as it used to be, because the number of organized criminals being relocated has really fallen off. People have decided, for a lot of reasons, that they prefer not to be in the witness security program, even when they can be. There is no singular mafia. There is different groups. In Sicily, it's the mafia, or La Cosa Nostra, the Ndrangheta, I still have trouble saying that word, in Calabria, is probably the strongest. But it means basically it's a family thing and a religious thing. That these things are all tied to religion one way or the other, and they try to make it a force, a bond between people. Now the Ndrangheta, more than the Sicilian mafia, is based on family. The Sicilians were based on clan, and the Camorra, which is the organized crime group in Naples, is based on clan as well. That's what makes the Calabrian organized crime faction so much more dangerous. They're all family members. I discovered something else during my time dealing with the Italians. The organized crime there, which was a result in many cases, a carryover from hundreds of years. There was this kingdom, and even prior to that, where there was vying between the Spaniards and the French, and sometimes the Germans, for control. So they hired these young toughs, if you will, to sort of protect them from these invaders. Well, pretty soon the young toughs found out they could make a great deal of money shaking down the very people who hired them. I remember talking to them during the course of our meetings, people who knew they were going to die, knew they were going to be martyred for their country, and were willing to do it because they knew that that was the only way Italy could ever emerge as the power that it should be, was to break this stranglehold. There was a partnership, if you will, between both the underworld and law enforcement and the court system and the politicians that was just strangling. Now, the Ndrangheta does most of their business through the UK. Their profits are in the billions, with a B, not in the millions, in the billions, and mostly it's from their control of the cocaine trade today. But you know, organized crime was almost beaten at one point in Italy through all these efforts. When you wonder about how they got started in the drug trade in Italy, they used to bring the cigarettes in through a certain route. They only had to substitute drugs for the former product, which was cigarettes, and that they did. They did a very effective job that made them a lot of money. Now that coupled with unholy alliances with unions, now with banks, there's a number of banks that have through the years become leaders in money laundering. There's restaurants and other businesses which are also involved in money laundering. And this is worldwide. This isn't just in Italy or just in the United States. And there's not just organized crime in Italy or the United States. There's organized crime everywhere. The Chinese and the Japanese organized criminals are some of the most sophisticated in the world. South American organized crime, the Colombians, those are all examples of people who've made tremendous successes within that kind of illegal framework. But you see where it gets them in the end. It gets them in jail or dead. I always remember the statements made by young people, particularly African American young people who would get arrested and knew they were going to die early, knew that the business they were in was going to take their lives, that one of these days the odds were going to catch up with them. But they felt so hopeless that they didn't feel they had a choice, that they'd rather live a few good years than a lot of bad years. Boy, that's sobering when you think of it.